busted my tooth. I woke up Monday morning 2 weeks ago and saw that Midjourney, the AI image generation program, was accepting beta testers, just like an open beta at that point. And it's something I've been interested in a while, so I signed up immediately and got my 25 free image generations, which I thought would take me all day to do. What I found was that it is incredibly addictive, and those 25 images lasted maybe an hour before I had run out of them, and then I had a choice of paying $10 to do 250 more images or $30 to get unlimited images for the month. Well, I went for the $10 because who could possibly generate 250 images in a day? I went through those 250 in about 4 hours and realized I needed to spend $30 a month to get the unlimited plan. So if you don't know what Midjourney or Dall E2 or Stable Diffusion are, they're AI image generators in which you type sort of a sentence or just some descriptors and some sort of commands, and an image pops up. It could take a couple of seconds if you're doing it at a fast rate. Sometimes it takes minutes if you're more in relaxed mode with Midjourney. It's amazing. The first couple of things I started to do were just random words, objects, strange things that popped into my head. And then pretty quickly I realized I could do a children's picture book out of this. And I thought maybe I could have a little story about a little boy and a frog. And very soon I ran into a wall of just describing the character would not have a consistent result. I would have a boy in a blue shirt with black curly hair, but the results were not really anything satisfying. If I would try to get him to do specific actions like swimming at the bottom of the ocean, it just didn't really work out. So I then tried a different approach. I thought, if all these images are being taken from the internet, maybe there's celebrity photos in there. So I put in some actor names. And that's when I kind of hit the jackpot of being able to get consistent images in multiple situations. I could have the same person appear in different places, and it gave me an idea. If I could have consistent characters and move them into different locations and have them do different things, maybe I could make a comic book. Now, I've been making comics on and off for 20-something years, not including when I was a kid. I did my first comic in 2000. There's a 3D comic that I did in 3D Studio Max that was called The Astounding Adventures of Captain Lightning. And what was great about doing stuff in 3D was that I was able to pose the characters in any way possible. I could do sort of whatever I wanted in terms of big motions. What I couldn't do were crowd scenes. I couldn't do complex backgrounds because I had to model every single element of that. Well, Midjourney is different in that it lets you generate essentially anything in terms of backgrounds. Say you want a cathedral, well, you'll get a cathedral. Say you want a crowded street, you can get a crowded street. So within those first few hundred images, I realized I was sort of developing a story. I had this main character. I had a dream that she was going to be having and some sort of elements of what I wanted that dream to be. So I started to just iterate from there and try her in different situations with these goat characters and see what came up. Within a couple of hours, I had finished 10 pages of a comic. I had written it, I had laid it out in Comic Life 3, and it was, honestly, it was one of the most amazing creative days I've ever had in my life. It was just so satisfying to do that. But then I had 10 pages of this sort of dream sequence comic that ended with her waking up from the dream. And I had more of a story I wanted to tell. I had probably 10 more pages worth of images that I had developed for the further part of the story. But it was time to go to sleep and take a break. Over the next 2 weeks, I slowly, or at least more slowly than that first day, started to generate more images and test things out and see how I can tell the rest of the story that I wanted to tell. There's a lot of animal analogies that I could bring up, like trying to talk to your dogs, because, man, I try to talk to my dogs and they have no idea what I'm doing, and it's a little bit like that with an AI, It's also like having an infinite number of monkey artists that are doing something, and it's sort of like what you want, but not really. But I think the analogy that's closest to how this whole thing of creating this Goats comic is doing improv. So if you've ever done any improv, it's saying yes and to whatever your scene partner is doing. So you're sort of building on what they say, and they're building on what you say, and together you're telling a story. This was a lot like that, except it's like working with the most brilliant actor who doesn't understand the language properly that you're saying to them. So I would say I wanted this character to be in a bookshop in front of a shelf of books. And sometimes her head would be in the shelf of books. Sometimes her head would be floating somewhere. Sometimes two heads would appear in the same shot of the same person. You never really had predictable results. You couldn't sort of see the direction things were going to go. You could feed what you thought is a perfect instruction, but it just didn't come out the way you wanted. So I found myself rewriting a lot of what I wanted to do. Or I would have to write bridging information. I would look at a panel and say, okay, this is what I would ideally like it to be, but I'm going to have to put something else in there and maybe write a caption to sort of explain that bridging. So the comic ended up being a lot of sort of like a personal journal or her memoir of this situation. A lot more telling than showing, and as a storyteller, that's something I was told never to do. It seems to have worked in this this story. I think it came out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the results, and have gotten a lot of positive feedback so far. But it was like a very imprecise tool. One of the most difficult things was action. I wanted to have an action sequence of this one character being killed and the main character running off away from the villain. And it is almost impossible to get Midjourney to do any kind of action. I'm not sure if that's specifically because they've banned certain words, because I wasn't using any of the banned words. Banned words are mostly dealing with sexuality, nudity, and violence. Just to try to get her to run. Anytime I would type in a run command, maybe one of her legs would be off the ground. A lot of times she was just kind of standing in an alley. It was very frustrating to try to get that action, but eventually I got things that kind of worked. The hardest thing I think I had was trying to get her to duck behind a wall or just hide behind a wall. I could never get a satisfying image of kind of like somebody going sideways. It was always like her just standing there. One of the best examples of how the AI doesn't understand what a human might understand is I typed that I wanted the character that she ducks behind a wall, and the image generated had a bunch of vague ducks next to her rather than her ducking. So she was standing with some ducks. That's what happens. So while I've had a ton of positive feedback from friends, family, and a lot of other Midjourney users, I also posted it on Reddit's comics group and their horror comics group. And the feedback I got there was, again, very positive, but they brought up some good discussion, I think, and the things we kind of maybe need to talk about. One young artist was like really concerned because he's just getting into the comics industry and is worried about sort of his livelihood. What does this mean for him? And I don't know that I can answer that. I think right now any artist is kind of safe and able to create things much more precise and much more specific than an AI can generate. Will that continue? I mean, this technology seems to be, Midjourney I think has only been around 3 or 4 months. It's really growing really exponentially. I think version 3 of Midjourney came out 2 weeks ago, the day that I started using it, and it is incredible how much it's changed since version 2 and how much more precision it's had in creating faces and bodies. Another issue is kind of legal ramifications of a lot of this. Who owns the copyright? I think there's like a discussion now with the Library of Congress in the United States about, I guess the AI can't have the copyright, obviously, because it's an AI. But, I mean, do I have the copyright because I wrote a sentence and this machine typed it out? I guess, but also, in my case, I use the likenesses of actors by saying that actor's name and doing something. Do they have any sort of legal rights to the image? Are there going to be points where actors sort of have their images removed from these libraries of images? I mean, in some ways, it's a lot like deepfakes, where people are making deepfake videos and putting them online and profiting off them in some cases. But it is kind of a weird, sticky situation. I think for myself personally, I am going to hopefully continue this story in another 2 issues. I have the idea for another sort of 2 to finish off this whole arc. But I'm not a good artist. I've been drawing a lot over the last 3 years. I had a job briefly at a comic store, and it inspired me to start drawing again. And in the 2 or 3 years since that happened, I've made 300 one-panel comics. I've done tons of little short 4 or 5 panel comics, a couple of page comics. I could never get anything satisfying from a serious kind of point of view. I could do funny things because I have a very simple style, but anytime I try to do something more in the horror realm, which is something that's really dear to my heart, it never really would turn out. And so to have this tool to be able to do that, I think is wonderful. I do see it in even my sort of comedy, funny comics that maybe I'll draw the characters but use AI to generate the backgrounds. There's a lot of debate within the AR community. Almost every day somebody says, but you're not artists, and I agree with that. But man, the hammer comes down on those people really fast. I really see this as an exercise in art curation more than anything, art direction, creative direction. So many people have ideas in their heads that they've never been able to get out in a satisfying way, and this is getting them far closer than they've ever had a chance before. It's beautiful, and it's exciting, and it's also a little bit terrifying because we don't know where it's going to go. There's just so much that it can do very early on, and it's a little bit unnerving, but I don't think you can put this genie back in the bottle, and we just kind of have to figure it out as creative people, what we're going to do with it, how we're going to use it, because yeah, it's here, and it's scary, and it's going to eat your brain like this guy.